We all know what it feels like to hit an absolute dead end. It is that terrifying moment when your resources dry up, your logical options vanish, and every drop of hope seems to evaporate. But in the narratives of the ancient Near East, this state of utter deficit is rarely the end of the story. It functions as the necessary starting point for something that defies human capability. The fourth chapter of 2 Kings maps out how these impossible dead ends are actually navigated. The text follows a specific progression of testing. It begins with material lack, climbs toward the weight of existential loss, and finally reaches a point of mathematical impossibility. These accounts suggest that a breakthrough doesn't wait for us to find a solution. It begins precisely when we have exhausted every resource we have. The first tier is material lack. A widow faces a debt she cannot pay, possessing nothing but a single, nearly empty jar of oil. The prophet Elisha gives her a strange directive. She must go to her neighbors and borrow as many empty vessels as they can spare. This requires the widow to step out into her community and admit her poverty, gathering empty pots for a supply that does not yet exist. The miracle of provision initiates when she pours her last drops into borrowed jars. As shown here, the flow of oil expands to meet available capacity, stopping only when the last vessel is filled. The provision was limited only by her willingness to keep borrowing and keep pouring. It required her physical action to bridge the gap between her deficit and the surplus. The stakes then escalate from a loss of money to the death of a dream. A Shunammite woman who had been granted a son in her old age suddenly loses the child to a brief, violent illness. Her response is focused. She places the boy in a private room, secures her husband's support, and immediately travels to find the prophet. When Elisha arrives, he doesn't perform a public spectacle. He shuts the door, isolating himself with the boy, and engages in a slow, persistent prayer that requires his entire focus and presence. This wasn't a snap of the fingers. The text describes a repetitive, intimate process of seeking life for the child, suggesting that some recoveries require an unyielding, patient proximity to the source of life. When our most profound hopes collapse, these verses point to a stubborn clinging to the promise giver rather than a surrender to despair. The final tier reaches the absolute defiance of natural law, set against a backdrop of regional famine. The math is stark. 100 starving men are presented with 20 small barley loaves. Logically, 80 people will remain hungry, but Elisha ignores the deficit. As the bread is distributed, the 20 units rapidly multiply to fill the entire grid. The outcome bypasses the laws of physics. Every man ate his fill, and there was bread left over, proving that these resources were no longer bound by the scarcity of the famine. When we face a deficit that logic cannot solve, these accounts suggest we are looking at the work of an architect who operates outside the limits of the finite. The empty jar, the quiet room, and the scarce bread all point to a God who steps directly into the specifics of a crisis. In the Gospel of John, Jesus notes that those who have his commands and keep them are the ones who experience his presence. It is the small daily steps of response that open the door to this kind of intervention. But notice a detail that connects all these moments. None of these people were actually alone. The widow needed her neighbors to provide the jars. The Shunammite woman needed her husband's help to reach the prophet. The disciples faced the famine as a community, sharing the bread as it multiplied. The journey of faith isn't a solitary endurance test. It is designed to be lived in the spaces between us, where we carry each other's burdens until we witness the impossible together.